Hi, welcome to Infusion Health, the podcast. I'm comedian Chris Patrick, aka self-proclaimed power man, and I'm here with my co-host and significant other, Rach.
Hey guys.
Now today we got we got an interesting show. We got a show that I feel everybody needs to talk about. We got a guy by the name of Eric Fawcett. He's a therapist, and he's calling from he's a local guy calling from St. Paul, Minnesota, and he's going to talk to us about talking to parents about children to their children about LGTBQ, about the LGTBQ community. Eric, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. You too. It's a pleasure.
So you talk to parents about children
having that communication.
Okay. Let's go with that.
Yeah, in my practice, I have both a private practice and I also am a contractor at Edges Wellness in Minneapolis. And Edges is, in a way, kind of an epicenter for therapy for LGBTQ folks. And a lot of our clients are kids and children, which could be adult children of parents who don't identify as LGBTQ, but the kids do. And so a lot of the family systems work.
How old are the kids?
So the kids could be 8 years old or 18 years old or 14 or 28 or 38.
So how does the 8-year-old know that he's part of the LGTBQ community?
Well, that's a really good question. So in our education as therapists and in the research that we read, it's pretty well established that we are sexual beings from the time we're born to the time we die.
Mm-hmm.
That's just something that we have now come to really understand as a fact. And as such, we start expressing that at a pretty young age. And sometimes, with all of the messaging that we get in the media and in with between kids and their peers, they have a lot of messages. They receive a lot of messages about how they're supposed to identify.
Mm-hmm.
And for a lot of kids, the messages that they're receiving from culture about, which is, very cisgender, heterosexual.
Mm-hmm.
Let me just explain the term gender for a second, because it's kind of strange if you're new to it.
Mm-hmm.
Cisgender means that and I personally do identify as cisgender, meaning I identify as male and I was assigned the gender of male at birth.
Yep.
So as such, I'm a cisgender person. Folks who are not cisgender were assigned a gender at birth and then later on personally identify as something else.
Sure.
Okay. So a lot of folks will receive messages about what gender means from mainstream media, and it corresponds with how they themselves identify. And so, often there isn't a problem, but for lots of kids, the messages that they get from society and from friends are at odds with what they feel in their body.
Parents, who they're told by their parents, you are this gender. I don't want to hear anything else from you.
Absolutely. And, these parents who I work with, they all love their kids.
Yeah.
They all adore their children, and they are doing the very best that they can, given the messages that they grew up with and they've come into parenthood with. And so we're in a place where the research is really helping us to understand how people process identity, how people come to view themselves as a particular gender, as a particular sexual orientation. And a lot of what we're doing as therapists are translating between, and we're talking in this case about kids and their parents. Sometimes the conversation it goes the other way, where the parents are coming out as either transgender or a sexual orientation that they hadn't been
allowing themselves
known to
have.
be. Yeah. So the translation is going between kids and parents and kids. And our job is to just to help folks normalize this process.
Mm-hmm. Well, like with talking with our kids, I said, I understand, but one of the things is when I grew up, boys were boys and girls were girls. Boys played, baseball, football, kickball and stuff like that. The girls were over doing jump rope. Boys did this, girls did that. Girls played with Barbie dolls, boys played with GI Joe. It was very. This is how you are, and this is how you grew. This is how I grew up. And I said so. It's hard for me. Well, not hard anymore now that I know about it. And that's one of the things about conversations like this is like you start to know about it, and you're like, okay, why is this guy walking around in a dress for?
Well, right, or that used to happen, but it was seen as pathological, or it was seen as weird. Mm-hmm. And what we've learned is so many folks. Let's just focus on the transgender experience for a minute. In the last few years, in part because of the progress that has happened in normalizing different sexual orientations and realizing that there's an infinite spectrum of where people land in their sexual orientation. There's not 1, 2, 3, or 8 categories.
There's not just transgender. There's demi, there's drag, there's different spectrums in that too.
That's right. And so now there is an explosion of conversations happening about the transgender experience, which can be and is really disorienting for folks who are coming to it for the first time. Because, Chris, as you point out, we are taught from a very young age, those of us of a particular generation, that boys are boys and girls are girls. And if you have a penis, you're a boy. If you have a labia, a vagina, you're a girl. Mm-hmm. And what we're learning is that gender is a much more, I would say, I could say complex, and it is, but I would say interesting mixture of how one identifies, and also anatomy. Anatomy isn't irrelevant, but it's only one part of the equation for how folks identify. And it previously was so taboo for kids and adults to talk about identifying as a gender that they weren't assigned at birth, that they didn't talk about it. Mm-hmm. And instead, they killed themselves.
Yeah.
And that's dramatic. It might sound dramatic to say, it's simply the case. If we look at suicide rates for transgender folks, it is off the charts.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And thankfully, because of growing awareness, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I have to believe that because of growing awareness, that they are lower than they used to be, but still compared to how other folks identify, yes, it's very much higher. We have a long way to go.
So we still need to get education and acceptance out there.
We still need to have education and acceptance. Earlier this year, I don't know if you all were aware of the very talented Dave Chappelle dedicating almost a whole Netflix special to his own dialogue internally about the transgender experience. He had been widely criticized for his comments about it. And I won't get into the details of this performance, but there were folks on both sides of the conversation of transgender who found both controversy but also support from what Dave was talking about. And in a way, he did a really good job of presenting what a lot of culture is grappling with, mm-hmm. with the transgender experience and reality for folks. And I think it kind of promoted the conversation in a way, even though a lot of what he said was still very problematic for folks.
Mm-hmm. Well, I got a personal story. We we had Ellie Krug on the show, and she actually came to our house and did the podcast.
Very
and
beautiful soul.
Yeah, and if you don't know who Ellie Krug's on AM 950, 10 o'clock Saturdays, I think 11 o'clock on Sundays or whatever, but she does a radio show. She's transgender and actually, basically grew up, same way. You're a boy and this, got married, had a couple of daughters, and tried to hide who she was, and then it didn't last that long, and she actually came out who she was and what she was gonna be. And then fast forward a few months later, we go to my friend's wedding. I can't mention her because she said you can
Please
talk.
don't.
Yeah. She said, please don't. But I asked her, well, what's your brother up to? He goes, oh, my brother. She said, well, my brother's now, his name is, and he's transgender. And again, was married, had some kids, and divorced his wife. And his wife is
The family's having problems with it.
remarried. And she was like, well, I still, recognize him as my brother and all that. I said, yeah, I can understand. But since interviewing Ellie Krug, I was like, well, you got to understand too what he's been going through his whole life. And again, not to diss Catholics, but they're Catholic. I said, but knowing what he's been going through and what's been locked in him for the longest time, you got to look at it like that, and just accept him and just be, he's still your brother and all that. But this is who he really was, and this is what's been going on in his mind for the longest time, and to finally come out and say, hey, this is what I'm going to do,
Something I love that story. Something that we learn again and again in the work we do as therapists is that validating a person's identity is one of the most important things to do our part in promoting their mental health. And parents may say, well, my 12-year-old is saying that they may be trans. They're questioning it.
Yeah.
I've never known them as trans. I know them as a boy, or I know them as a girl. And is it my job to promote what may be a temporary feeling of theirs, or is it my job to push back and say, no, if you want to wear dresses? No, you're a boy. You can't wear dresses. And what we know from the research, and that these parents are well-intentioned, but coming out, as anything that may be non-normative statistically, is not a convenient thing. And if someone was identified as a girl at birth and believes in their body that they're a girl, and in their heart, they're not going. There's not any amount of social pressure that is going to encourage that person to tell their parents that they may identify as a gender other than what they were assigned at birth. The research is showing us that when a child comes to us and says, hey, I've been questioning a thing and I want to talk about it, it's coming from a real place. Now, does that mean that real place might shift or might have some nuance to it later? Absolutely, that may be the case. And people, both in their sexual identity and gender identity, it's a fluid thing, often throughout life. And we have clients who, even in the course of a couple years of seeing them, may refine or change how they identify. But when they get validated for how they identify, it is a remarkable thing positively for their mental health. And for parents who will always play a uniquely powerful role in their kid's life, no matter how old that kid gets, if they can just hold that space and listen and honor and respect, even sometimes in the difficult face of religion or spirituality, of their own teachings, they are doing a powerfully positive thing for their child, believing the child's experience.
So my question for you is my thought process in this right? No matter what spectrum they're in, isn't it right that they usually talk to a stranger first, talk to their friends, and then talk to their parents about because they want to feel like okay in this process? Because from what I'm understanding is it's not easy to come out to your friends. It's not easy to come out to your family. And for me, if I was doing that kind of stuff, I'd feel better to talk to a stranger because they wouldn't be judging me so personally.
Rach, I'm so glad you mentioned that. Yes, by the time a child has talked to their parents, they've thought about this a long time, and they've talked to others. And would a parent prefer them talking to a stranger or having a safe haven with their parents? And there are safe ways for young people to be engaging confidentially and privately and safely online with folks without having to identify themselves. But there are also unsafe ways. And so where kids and their parents can come into some really hard places is when the kid comes home with this information and receives resistance. Or maybe the parent is able to hold space for it and talk to them, but the parent says, but let's not tell dad, or let's not tell your grandparents, or let's not tell our family friends. And the message that the kid gets is, okay, this is a secret and it's a dirty secret.
Yeah.
As opposed to, it's my identity, you're honoring it, parent, and you have my back.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. And in saying that, I'm not suggesting that the parent in that moment doesn't have a legitimate concern.
Of course, they're like, I had this future set of my child. Now I have to have a future built up in my head for my child.
Yes. And an additional layer to that, even if I, the parent, can reimagine that and promote that, then how do we share this with our dear friends?
Yeah.
Because our dear friends are in the mindset that this is wrong. Mm-hmm. Or how do we share this with our spiritual community, mm-hmm. who have a mindset that this is not only wrong, but maybe it is an act of sin?
Yep.
Mm-hmm. And so there are lots of ripples that this affects. What it comes down to, where the conversation inevitably goes, is what is the parent's value that they bring to parenting? What is the personal value that they bring to parenting? And spiritual communities, and I just want to be really clear, we take folks' spirituality really seriously in our work. I certainly do. And spiritual traditions are really important for family cohesion and the way that folks interact. And so it's important as therapists that we don't dismiss it. And it's important that we point out the way in which some spiritual traditions that speak out against gender identities and sexual orientations that are not traditionally, quote, normative, that the impact on children and adult children is incredibly poor mental health and challenges and high incidence of suicide.
Okay. Well,
and so, yeah.
Keep going. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So it comes down to a conversation of where is the parent going to stand in that? Because what we find is that there are folks of all traditions who do side unequivocally in support of and in vocal support of their LGBTQ kids and children, and communicate with their community about this support, and they're vocal about it, and they encourage the community also to support, as opposed to simply acting against the spiritual community, which may also be legitimate if the resistance is too great. Mm-hmm. But we do encourage parents to engage with their spiritual community to see if the community can flex.
Mm-hmm. One of the things with spirituality is like, and one of the things I've seen is that some people, and maybe I just got the the obvious answer, but some people like, well, the church I've been going to since I was a kid, I was confirmed there or whatever, had communion there, don't recognize me or don't recognize my lifestyle. And the way I look at it is like, well, hey, find another church, but some people are like, well, I've been going there since I was a kid and they won't accept my marriage or they won't marry me because of, well, I'm like, well, then you need to find another church, that collection plate comes by, don't put your money in it or, don't support that type of religion that doesn't support you,
Chris, yes. And so I first wanted to address the idea that one doesn't necessarily have to leave the tradition that they're in if they do not want to. Mm-hmm. But so often, and I would say the majority of the time, staying in that spiritual community is not an option. And there has been, and there's a growing number of spiritual communities that are not only accepting of LGBTQ folks, but actually are advocates for the LGBTQ experience. And it becomes a question then for family. How does the family want to orient themselves spiritually? And one important part of this is the child, the person who's coming out to their parents, is really the one we look to guide the process. That person may not want parents going to family friends and going to the spiritual community and talking about how the child is identifying. Or, it's really the timeline of coming out that is determined by the child that we look to for that process. Mm-hmm. And, there isn't one right way of coming out. The coming out process is actually something that has been researched. And autonomy, the child's autonomy to determine the how and the when is really important. And that extends to, does the child want to continue to practice the same spiritual tradition if they ever, practiced one? Or is their choice to be in rebellion against it? Mm-hmm. Or is there a middle ground where they are in the same spiritual tradition in large part, but they've found a different community that is advocating for them?
One of the things that opened my eyes and was Rachel's cousin got married, and he married another guy, and we went to the wedding, and I'm like, wait, this is at a church?
Yeah, that was awesome.
So they actually got married at a church, and then at the reception, his dad, her uncle, actually said, he said, we're thankful for this union. And he said, one thing I just want everybody to know, we approve this marriage. And I was like, whoa, it really made me open my eyes, is that, we can be accepting of who they are. And they're still married today. And I think they just adopted a kid, so.
I love that story.
What I was going to say is just a side note. My cousin who is getting married this year, my aunt has a total of 8 kids. She adopted 2. My cousin, when she was in grade school, they were going to Catholic school, and she wanted to hurt herself. She wanted to kill herself. And the school told her this is a sin. They were being very harsh on her that it was a sin and showing her Bible principles of why this was a sin instead of trying to get her the mental health of it. My aunt was so livid that she decided to pull all her kids out of there until they could go to public school at an age where they could get to public school, and started homeschooling her kids. It had nothing to do with the community, but here's the thing. Are you going to support your child, or are you going to make a stand in your spiritual community and say, I'm here right by my child. Or are you going to allow your spiritual community to bash your child? You know, that's where it is. And for me, it's when you allow that to happen to your child, a child looks to the parent, never blames the parent, and always internalizes that stuff, and it carries on until adulthood. So the child is now in their 40s and they're looking at themselves and saying, why didn't my parents ever accept me for me?
Yeah. Yeah. As kids with parents, we, as much as we may want to deny their power, they simply, they are always powerful. And sometimes you're right. Sometimes the kids internalize the responsibility because they don't want to blame the parent. And that is absolutely, that does happen. And so they are in later life or middle life, and suddenly they're realizing, okay, wait, this is a really big deal for me, and I need to make a change. Other times, they are very quick to blame the parents. And something I see happening for young adults who identify somehow as LGBTQ is that these kids, and I say kids, to their parents, they're kids, but these young people do all kinds of research. They seek therapy. They learn about what it means, the importance of identity. Their parents are not doing this work yet because the parents can't even talk about it.
Right.
Or the parents can talk about, certain things happening in the world or see them in holidays, but they don't want to meet their partner. If they meet their partner, they're at least not curious about, they're not showing true investment. So what's happening is that these young people are in some ways growing more mature and in some ways wiser than the parents. So when the parents decide to come to therapy or engage at an adult way with their kids about what the kids are going through,
Sure.
the parents can feel intimidated because the level of conversation, there's a difference in the language that the two sides are using. The kids who've become very educated about what it means for a person to come out and has all kinds of terminology are way ahead of the parents. And so I've seen in therapy the parenting role shift so that the kids sound like the parents and the parents feel talked down to. And so there are a few challenges there. And one is for the parents to really drop their defensive stance.
Right.
Because they can really feel patronized by the children. And it's for both sides to slow the conversation down and for the parents to reassert their parenthood, which really means assuming the quiet, listening, nurturing, unconditional love stance, which can be really hard to do, especially if the child needs to go through a phase of just really being pissed off.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So if you have if to my listeners out there, if you have a kid who you think may be part of this community or maybe showing signs of this community, one of the things is and you could probably help us, should they seek therapy right away or?
Well, you mean the parents?
Yeah.
I always feel like the parents of LGBTQ folks, if they're feeling any resistance at all to their children coming out, that either or both individual therapy or a group therapy experience is pretty crucial.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying it's impossible for a parent to move through this process without that, but if, like most parents, they are coming from a standpoint of, I don't know what's happening, I don't believe my child, I feel duped, I feel like my child is seeking attention. Or if something's coming up, what will grandma and grandpa say? What will our community say? The parents are often feeling like they have a lack of support. In all of those situations, going to therapy, finding someone who the parent connects with, but also someone who they trust to challenge them, can really help in several ways. One, can help the parent themselves contextualize what's happening, but it's also a powerful piece of evidence that the child can point to and say, my parent's trying, my parent's working, my parent cares. Yeah. And that piece is crucial.
Mm-hmm. Well, this has been definitely an eye-opening experience, and it's definitely been an interesting conversation. Love to have you back later and talk more about this. But if somebody wants to get a hold of you, Eric, is there you got a website or email somebody could get a hold of you?
Absolutely. So my website is attunerelational.com, ATTUNERELATIONAL, attunerelational.com. And my email is simply Eric, ERIC, at attunerelational.com.
And that will be on our link. Eric, go ahead and text that to me when we're done. And
okay.
And do you do in person and Zoom?
Currently, I'm just doing virtual online, but as things open up, I will. I have lots of clients who are very used to and very happy with online therapy.
Okay.
But I always prefer to see my clients in person, and so for those in the Twin Cities area, I will be happy to schedule in-person sessions as pandemic circumstances ease.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll let Rach close us out.
All right. Well, history is born on lines of hate. On here, we are trying to build lines of love and trying to make you guys your best advocate. If you appreciated this, please listen to the next one. And you guys have a great week.
Take it easy.